Picture this. You're scrolling through your social media feed and you see a headline that says something like 90% of crime is committed by people from X group. Alarming, right? But what if I told you that headline doesn't tell the full story? Today, we're going to break down the problem with statistics, how we misread them, which ones are the worst to misunderstand, and how this affects us in everyday life. By the end of this video, you'll see why some numbers aren't as clear as they seem. Let's dive in. Statistics are supposed to give us clear, objective insights into the world, but the reality is that they can be misleading, and it happens more often than we think. Why? Because stats are only as good as how they're presented. And sometimes, even with the best intentions, people get them wrong. Here's how. One of the biggest issues is correlation versus causation. Just because two things happen at the same time doesn't mean one causes the other. Here's a classic example. Did you know that ice cream sales increase in the summer and so do shark attacks? Does that mean eating ice cream makes you more likely to get attacked by a shark? No. But the numbers, if presented a certain way, might make you think so. Let's go to another example. A more difficult example, I might add, global warming. We've been tracking the trends of the warming of our globe for the last 100 years or so, right? So here's the thing. We have no idea about the trends of the warming and cooling of the planets thousands and thousands of years ago. Yeah, we have ideas. We have theories, right? But the reality is we have not been able to track the temperature back thousands of years. What we may think is global warming, which probably is, I think is global warming, it could just be a natural trend of warming and cooling that our planet goes through, that we would need to be alive for tens of thousands of years to actually experience. Does that make sense? Okay, moving on. Another common way we misread stats is through cherry picking data. You know those articles or news segments where they show you a single year or 2 years of data to prove a point? What they're not showing you is the bigger picture, which might paint a completely different story with long-term trends. Numbers can look different depending on how they're framed. For example, a company might report, we increased profits by 200% this year. But if their profits went from $1 to $3, is that really impressive? Always ask yourself, what context is missing from the statistic? This storyline was prevalent when it comes to Asian hate crimes increasing over the last 5 to 10 years or so, right? Propaganda was being pushed a lot around the time of the pandemic about an uptick in Asian hate. And yes, there was an uptick in Asian hate. In the year 2020, Asian hate had increased over 200% in Los Angeles. That change equated to literally 8 more hate crimes, from 7 hate crimes to 15. Over the same period in New York, there was an uptick of over 900%. Now, someone who may be Asian and they're reading this type of article and they just see the headline, they see a bunch of headlines like this, they may think that there's a sense of paranoia that they should move through this country with. But in reality, that 900% increase was from 3 cases to 28 cases. These, in quantity wise, very small numbers, very small increases. But when you look at it from the perspective of percentage, it looks like a lot more than it actually is. And a lot of people use this to frame it in certain ways to manipulate people, especially in elections. And these are some of the worst kinds of statistics to misinterpret. These are the ones that can lead to real world consequences. And unfortunately, some of the most commonly misread stats are around race, crime, and education. Race and crime statistics are some of the most misused numbers in the media and political debates. You've probably heard stats like people of X race are more likely to commit crimes or white group has higher dropout rates in school. But here's the thing, these numbers are often stripped of critical context, and that can lead to harmful stereotypes and misunderstandings. Let's break it down. The reality is that crime correlates more strongly with poverty than it does with anything else. People living in poverty-stricken areas are more likely to be involved in crime regardless of their race. Yet when we misread or misinterpret the data, it can reinforce racist ideas that certain racial groups are inherently more criminal or less educated. In reality, issues like systemic racism, poverty, and lack of resources are much bigger drivers of these stats. Especially when we look at the Black community in America, when we look at the fact that, schools are funded by the city taxes, and if the city is poor, if the city is full of ghettos, if the local taxes are funding the schools, then the schools are also going to be not very good. right? And so you got bad schools, you got bad communities, and at least the bad outcomes, and you got these people who have been pushed towards the bottom of this new classes system. It was always kind of classes, but it was more racist before. I would argue that today in 2024 is a little more classes for sure, but the reality is racism put black people in America at the bottom of the totem. And then classism came in, and then immigration came in. And all these people came over here, and they get assimilated into these American ideals, into this American system. And what is happening is they look at these different numbers and these stats, and they use it to enforce stereotypes. So yes, we do see disparities in educational and economic achievement across different racial groups. But when you look deeper, those disparities are often tied to unequal access to quality education, historical inequities, and economic barriers. Misreading these stats fuels dangerous stereotypes and ignores the real problems we should be addressing, like improving education for everyone. When we misinterpret or oversimplify these kinds of statistics, it doesn't just skew our understanding of the world, it actually makes things worse. By focusing on race instead of the root issues like poverty and inequality, we perpetuate the cycle of discrimination. And this isn't just about race. Misreading statistics can create biases around gender, around income, around mental health, and so much more. So why does this matter? Look, how does misreading statistics affect us in our day-to-day lives? The truth is, it shapes everything from our personal biases to major political decisions. Take elections, for example. Politicians know that statistics are powerful tools for influencing public opinion. They use numbers to back up their claims, but not all of those numbers are what they seem. One side might claim crime is rising out of control, while another claims education is improving, and they're both using selective statistics to make their case. In reality, the truth might lie somewhere in between, but by misreading or oversimplifying these numbers, we get manipulated. These people will choose 1 to 2 year data sets. These people will choose particular pockets of a trend to make their point and present only that information and leave it up to everybody else that they're presenting to go and do the deep research and to fact check. Statistics around race and crime are especially weaponized in political discourse. When you hear politicians or commentators throw out crime stats about certain racial groups, they're often using them to justify policies like harsher policing or cutting social services. But if we dig deeper, we see that tackling poverty, not race, is the key to addressing crime. And it's not just in politics. Misreading statistics affects race relations in society as a whole. When certain groups are continually associated with negative stats like crime or educational failure, it reinforces harmful stereotypes and creates division. Instead of working to solve the root causes like poverty or underfunded schools, we end up blaming entire groups of people for systemic problems. Systemic problems in a system that they have not had leadership in. At the end of the day, misreading stats creates a cycle where we focus on the wrong issues, blame the wrong people, and let the real problems go unaddressed. And this is exactly what keeps us stuck, whether it's in how we approach race, crime, education, or any number of social issues. So, how do we fix this? How do we stop misreading statistics and start understanding them properly? First, always be critical of the stats you see, especially when they're presented without context, especially if they're just a headline. Ask yourself, where did this data come from? What's the full story? Who did the research? Is there a hidden factor being ignored? Where can I access this data for myself? Second, don't just look at one stat in isolation. Take the time to look at long-term trends and broader data sets. You might find that things aren't as simple as they first appear. And finally, make sure you're listening to experts who understand the complexities behind the numbers. Whether it's economists, social scientists, or statisticians, they'll often give you the full picture instead of the headline version. In the end, statistics are incredibly useful tools, but only when we use them correctly. Misreading stats can lead to real harm, whether it's fueling racism, manipulating elections, or shaping bad policy decisions. But if we take the time to understand the numbers and the context behind them, we can use stats to make better, more informed decisions. Thanks for watching, guys. Look, if you've ever been confused or frustrated by statistics, you're not alone. Let me know in the comments what stats you've come across that didn't quite make sense. And don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. See you next time. And remember, don't just trust the numbers, trust the context.